All right, in this tutorial, we are going to create, we have our obstacles already running through this scene, but what we need to do is we also need to create an additional object. We're going to start by creating another prefab, and this one's going to be called Boost. And what Boost is going to do is it's going to be something that gives us a speed boost, right? Where the obstacle is going to slow us down some. The boost will boost us. And so to start that process, it's pretty simple. We're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and create a 3D object. I'm going to create a capsule because that just sort of, it makes sense. It's like a pill or something like that. So let's go ahead and create a capsule. And once we create that capsule, capsules are taller than spheres or cubes, right? They have their default height is 2 units. And so I want to make y1 as my y position. And then in order to get this thing started, what's nice about this is I actually have one here that I've already created, and we'll talk about that in a second. I'm just going to leave this one named Capsule, but you should change the name to Boost so that you have that set. But if I go to my obstacle prefab and I open that prefab up and I select my flow graph. So I'm going to be using the same flow graph for the boost as I am using for the obstacle. So let's go ahead and hop back over to our project, get out of this view, and let's go to our boost. I'm just going to call this Capsule Boost, so I've renamed it something, but you should just call it Boost if you don't have it already. So I'm going to say Capsule Boost. And then the other thing I need to do is I need to add a component. It needs to be a flow machine, so type in flow. It was already the last thing I typed in, so there it is. And then instead of creating a new macro, I'm just going to click on my macros and I'm going to come down until I find obs motion, right? That was my obstacle motion macro. You may have named it something else. Just check your obstacle to see what macro is attached. And I'm going to go ahead and attach that. But I'm just going to say obs motion. And when I do that, I am going to click on Edit Graph. And I want to make sure that everything is set in here. Now, I may have made a change because I was poking and prodding and looking at things where I might have had this road speed variable or an object speed variable or something over here that we did in the first one. What I want you to do is wherever that was connected, this is the big thing, is that I've created a scene variable called object speed. And so if I go up to scene here, you'll see I have road speed, I have hit points, I actually have a speed up variable in here now. We're going to talk about that and slow down, and we'll talk about that too. But I have object speed, right? And so I've just defaulted object speed to -20, right? I think initially we had it set to -10. You could leave it at either. It doesn't really matter at this point, although it'd make it easier if we all had the same thing. So make sure you're in the scene tab up here and create this object speed variable if it doesn't exist. And then whatever variable you have here, maybe you had a graph variable, and it was, I don't know, whatever it was, or an object variable that maybe was like, some sort of speed. But basically go to scene and make sure you have object speed selected here, right? And when you change it in one of these, what's nice is it's also going to update in the obstacle as well, right? And we actually want the speed of the obstacles and the boost. We want all of those to be the same, right? Unless, for some reason one of them is moving. Right now, they're just all static on the road and moving towards us, right? So we want them to move at the same rate. So we're going to set that. We're going to leave that object speed there. These two modules over here, or units over here, we can just delete. If you have those in yours, I think that was connected through some other things, and it was circuitous, and this cleans it up a bit. Okay, so we've got that set. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to modify our object generator code so that we can include this capsule in there. So what I'm going to do, I guess first, is we need to make sure we make this Capsule Boost a prefab, right? We've got our base settings. I'm going to double check on my obstacle here real quick because I want to make sure I have everything. Oh, I need to add a rigid body as well. And that should be all I need. So I'm going to select my Capsule Boost, add component, and then just RI is close enough to get rigid body. And I'm going to uncheck use gravity. I'm going to check mark is kinematic. Okay, so I've got all of the components that I need on there. So now I can take this Capsule Boost and I can just drag it down into my assets folder, into the prefabs folder if you've got one, and set it up. Now the other thing I guess that I need to do is we could add a material to this. So if I open this prefab and I go to, let's see here, I have materials somewhere, right? In this case, I'm just gonna, plunk this yellow on there, right? I did this plain material earlier. You could put whatever you want on there. I'm just gonna drop that. And once I've done that, I'm gonna pop out of my capsule and you'll see now I have this capsule option here. Okay, so on this, I do have these obstacles, but right, I have these in here just so I can quickly see them, but they're not actually being used in the scene. So if you have a copy like this, you just want to make sure it's unchecked, and I made it invisible as well, but really just unchecking will disappear it completely from the scene, right? Oh, and there's one other thing we'll have to do, but we can do that in a little bit because we'll need to create a tag so when it hits the collider, it'll disappear. But we're not too worried about that yet. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Capsule Boost, and because I do want it to be a child of the obstacle generator, I just want to put it in here, and it just makes it easier to organize, and when I close this up, it's easier to see. So now what I need to do is I need to go to my obstacle generator, right? This is where, if you remember, where we have the graph that has our code that's actually generating the obstacles and allowing them to flow down. So if I click on Edit Graph, and you'll note I have two flow machines on here. One of them is actually the final graph that I've already made, and I just kept it to make sure if I made any mistakes, I had something I could reference. All right, so here's our graph, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and then move this around a little bit. This is our graph as it stands right now, right? Every time this updates, we have this timer and this once, right, that fires off only once every second. And there's this variable obstacle time, which, right, we have here on our obstacle generator, which is currently 1 second, right? If we decrease that value, we're going to have more clones generated. If we increase the value, it'll be fewer. Now, one thing we could do is we could have a whole nother, graph like this that is just generating our other objects. However, there's a good chance that two of those objects would overlap, right? We'd have a boost overlapping with an obstacle, and that's not what we want. We want them to be separate. And so what we want to do is we want to have this one timer be generating both things and choosing sort of when it generates one and when it generates the other. And so we're going to be using another random number generator in order to make the decision between which objects should come first and which objects should come second, or when it should create one and when it should create the other. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by selecting everything from instantiate over, because we're essentially going to be reusing this code almost exactly. And so, I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste it. I'm just going to pull it up above the other line. And I'm going to need to give myself some more space here in a little bit, but that's fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, and instead of this original being obstacle, I'm going to set this to, and for me it'll be Capsule Boost. For you, it will be Boost, right? So the original is this, but right now this isn't connected to anything, right? So what I need to use is, and we've used it previously already, but it's the branch function so that when this comes through, we can branch between these two. But before we use that, we need to have a decision as to when to branch. And there's a couple different ways we could do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So the first one that will makes it easy to choose between two different options is if I right click and I say add unit and I just type in random. So what I want is random.value.get. And if I cruise down here a little bit, which there's a lot of color options and all sorts of things, this says it returns a random number between 0 inclusive and 1 inclusive, right? And what that means is that it will generate a value between 0 and 1, right? So what we can do is if we select this one, then what we'll need is we need a condition that's going to check and see if it's above or below a certain value. So what we'd like to do is say, if it's below 0.5, let's generate our capsule. And if it's above 0.5, let's generate our obstacles. And so we're going to right click and go add unit, and we're going to go down to logic. And logic has a bunch of different options in here. It doesn't matter if we use less than or equal or greater than or equal, but I'm going to use less or greater. Well, we want either less than or equal or greater than or equal. I'm going to choose less than or equal. And my B value is going to be 0.5. This is the value, and let me zoom in a little bit here. This is the value that is going to be that our random number will be compared against. And so I'm going to go ahead and drop this in here. And when I do that, now what I need to do is I need to send the true or false that comes out of here to a branch object unit. So I'm going to say add unit and just BR, probably get me close enough. Yep. So branch. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of the started flow just going into this one object, I'm going to take this in here. I'm going to take one of these branches and stick it up here. One of these branches, stick it down here. And then this branch here and drop it in here. Now, as soon as I've done that, I should be able to generate both of these obstacles or both of these objects. So let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. And hopefully there isn't an error right now. Okay, so here we go. We've got we've got both of our objects generating. Now, you'll note that these are actually a little bit low. I don't know if you can see it when the next one generates. It's kind of in the ground a bit, maybe. And that's just because, right, we need to update this. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. And put in a 1 there. I'm actually going to save my scene now. Okay, so this is the first step. We have successfully made it so we can randomly choose to generate two different obstacles. And I'm actually going to go ahead and take this value from 1 here, make it 0.5. And I'm going to go ahead and run this again. So, right, we should have a lot more clones that are being generated as this goes on. Okay, now the only issue is you can see that in this view, right, my obstacles are disappearing, but these other clones are not. And so what I need to do is stop this, and I'll need to create a tag and then create a condition on the trigger for those objects to be destroyed. So I'm going to select my Capsule Boost. I'm actually going to go to Capsule Boost in my prefabs folder and open it here, because then I'll make sure the tags on all the clones are the same. So I'm going to come down here, and I've already created this boost tag. You can go add tag, create the boost tag, and then remember when you do that, you have to select the object again and then add the tag, right? Because so at this point, because of the way we have this set up, there's an even chance, right? This 0.5 means, right, if this is a scale of 0 to 1 that we have being generated by this random generator, that means what we're saying is there's a 50% chance that we're going to create an obstacle and a 50% chance that we're going to create a boost. Now, that makes this game pretty easy, right? If the goal is to go as fast as you can and as far as you can, and not hit many obstacles, right? But if we want to make it more challenging or less challenging, we can adjust this value. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And I honestly don't remember. I switched the order on this, I think. But so if this is true, if this value is less than or equal to 0.5, right now what's going to happen is it's going to create the boost. If it's greater than 0.5, then it's going to create our obstacle. Right? And so what that means is, it's a 50-50 chance. If we want to adjust that, all we need to do is adjust this value, right? So if I say, if this is actually less than or equal to 0.3, that means 30% of the time it's, more or less, it is random, but 30% of the time it's going to generate a capsule, and 70% of the time it's going to generate an obstacle, right? And if I want that to be even thinner, right, in terms of boosts, right, I can set this to 0.1. And because this is a value that I could tie to a variable, it's something where maybe as time goes by, less and less boosts come up, right? And we've also talked about this duration, right, which we have a variable attached to, or I have a variable attached to, right? And so the duration, that's something else that over time could get shorter, so more and more objects appear on screen, right? These are ways that you could programmatically adjust the difficulty. So, but for now, we're just going to leave it as it is, but I've set this to 0.1, and I just want to watch this go. Because now it should be significantly more of the obstacles and significantly fewer of the capsules, which is exactly what we see, right? There's, I actually got a few in there. I'm kind of surprised how many showed up, right? But there's, a lot more obstacles being produced than there are capsules. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this. And before we go and fix some of the other issues that we're going to be having, and you'll notice that there's things going on here that may not be going on in your scene, and I apologize, but we're going to look at how I got those to happen and then fix some of the problems they're causing. What I really want to cover is, is how to add a third object. So we've got two things that we're creating right now, and using this equal or less and this branch works really well for two things. So the question is, how do you get more than two options? And there's multiple ways that we could do that. One way we could do that really ties into how you would do it if you were writing lines of code is we could create multiple comparisons, right? So we could have one that says, right, if this is less than or equal to, say, let's say 0.3. Oops, I think I just did 3, which is never going to be the case. 0.3, there we go. Right, so let's say we wanted 3 things, so we wanted this in thirds. So we wanted one where we wanted to check if it was less than a third, one where we want to check if it's more than 2/3, and then another one where we want to check if it's more than 1/3 and less than 2/3, right? And those key words in there are important because what we can do is if I was to go to add unit and go down to logic, you'll see that we've got this and you'll see that we've got greater than or equal to or less than and equal to. And so it would require us to use several of these logic units to build a chain of logic that would control which object was generated. And in code, that's actually super simple and doesn't take any time at all. It's a little more of a hassle just in Bolt, just because of creating all the units and linking them together. And it's a little dirtier looking just visually. There's a much simpler option. And that option is to use a control unit called switch. And so if I right click and I just go to control, there's a bunch of switch options here. The one we're going to want to choose is switch on integer. And what that means is basically you feed it a whole number, and it checks to see if that whole number matches one of its switches. And if it does, then it will send flow out the associated switch, right? And if it doesn't match any of the switches that you've defined, then it will send it out one called default. And so if I click on switch on integer, you'll see that I get this little thing. And right now it just has one input for flow and this default output and this option, and it doesn't look very useful at all. What I need to do in order to get more options here is I need to select it. I need to come over to the graph inspector, and you'll see this options with a little plus sign. If I click that, you'll notice that as soon as I do that, it has two flow outputs. One is 0 and one is default. And what this means is if I was feeding this integers in here and it got a 0, right, the flow would go out here. But if it got any other number from negative infinity to positive infinity, whole numbers, right, it would send it out this default port. And so if we know that we are going to have 3 options, what we can do is we can create two ports that have numbers associated with them and just leave the default as the third. So if I press this again, you'll see it says 0 and 0, and I need to change this to a 1 or a 2 or a 12 or 18 or whatever, but in our case we definitely want it to be a 1 in order to get this other one to show up, right? And I can do as many of these as I want. I don't know if there's a limit, but we can just keep going and going if there's a ton of different options that we want. So we've got that. So then the question is, well, how do we get a random integer in here? And what we need to do is we need to create a different type of random unit, right? We've been using random range over here, but we've been using the floating point version. We need to use the integer version here, or else it's going to be upset with us. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to say add unit, I'm going to type in random.range, and I want to make sure I do the integer one, which is the second option. It says return a random integer between min inclusive and max exclusive. So what does that mean? So what that means is, right, we're going to set a minimum range, which in our case we want to be 0. And then we're going to set a maximum range. And when it says the maximum value it's exclusive, that means that you'll always get one less than the maximum value, right? And it's because of the math that's going on inside of this thing as to why you need to basically make your range 1 greater than what you actually want. And so in our case, right, if we just have these, we want these 3 options, right? And everything starts from 0. So, right, 0, 1, and then 2. Well, default would be 2 in our case, right? So we could do this by saying, okay, 0, 1, 2, that's 3 values. And so I know that I want 0, 1, and 2 as options. So that means the max needs to be a 3, right? Because then I'll never get a 3, but I'll get a 0, a 1, and a 2 as options. And so I'm going to connect these two together. And we don't have a third object yet. We're going to go ahead and create that here in just a second. But so we've got these two set. And so let's go ahead and get everything else ready for this third object so that when we get it in there, all we're going to do is just drop it into this original field for this third thing. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to select this whole chain of the options here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to drag it down. And right now I'm just going to leave it set to obstacle because it doesn't really matter. And then I need to replace the branch and the equal to less than stuff with this new thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is from started, I'm going to connect to here. And then I'm going to go ahead and right click to disconnect these two grayed out branches, flows off the branch. This stuff, if you want to leave it here so you just have this chain of things in case you want to do some more random switching between two options, go for it. I'm going to pull this unit up. I'm going to pull this unit over just a hair. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, if I get a 0, let's say I want the capsule. Now, what I'm going to say is what we want is we're going to want to have the default be the object that we want to show up the most. Right now, they are going to be, because of the way we've done this, there will be an even distribution among these three randomly chosen things. So, but we'll talk about why we want default there in a second. So default's just going to go straight across to here. And if I wanted to, I could actually, why don't I just undo that last step? So let's do this again. So 0 is up here to the capsule. Let's say this middle one is going to be our third object. And the third object we're going to create is like a health unit, right? So it's going to be able to give us health, right? It'll boost our hit points if we hit too many obstacles. So I'm going to go ahead and pull 1 into here. And then the default's going to come down here to the obstacle. Now, why do I want the obstacle to be the default? Well, if you remember, I said that any value other than 0 or 1 is going to cause a message to be sent out through the default, right? So this flow is going to roll. And what that means is if I make this max higher, that means that I can control how frequently the obstacles are created and how rarely these this 0 and 1 are created, right? So if I made this 10, that means if I get a 0 or a 1, right, I'm going to create one of these. But if I get an 8 through a 9 or 10 or whatever, if I get 0 or 1, I'll get this. If I get 8 through 9, it's all going to come out here, right? So I'm going to get a bunch more of these objects than I am going to get of these other two. Now, one last thing. Let's say that, I want more speed ups or boosts to be populated than I want the health pickup, right? So what I can do is I can kind of game the system a bit by having creating a couple more flows and having those navigate to this same object. So let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to add 2 more, and I'm just going to make this 2 and 3. And so what I can do is I can bring 2 up here and I can bring 3 up here. And you can see that, right, I can have those 3 flows going into this one object. So whether I get a 0, a 2, or a 3, I'm going to create a capsule, right? And the only time I'm going to create a health unit is when I get a 1. And then everything else is going to create obstacles. Okay, so now that I've got all of this set up, let's save this. And then we're going to go ahead and create our health unit, and then we will continue. So now you could, I'm going to just create a simple object. It's going to be another capsule, and I'm going to color it differently. So I'm going to select a capsule. I'm going to rename this health, maybe even health pickup, just because. Because I've tested this earlier, I've already created a health tag, but go ahead and create a health tag and apply the health tag. And then we can go to project and we can go to our materials, and you can right click, and you could create a new material and drop in a color. I've created this nice beautiful pink color, called it life. I'm going to apply that to my capsule. The other things that I want to do with this capsule are or my health pickup is I'm going to set the Y value just to 1 instead of 0.6, just because. I'm going to leave the scale the same. But the other things I need to do, right, I need to make sure that this is a trigger. And something else to note, I don't think I told you to set our boost to a trigger, so we might need to do that as well, but I'm going to go check. So this is a trigger, and then I'm also going to just add a rigid body. And I want to make sure that that use gravity is off and is kinematic is on. Okay, so I've got that set, right? Everything here is set. The only thing I need to do now is add a flow graph. So I'm just going to say flow and add my flow machine, and then I'm going to use that same macro, the obs motion macro, as my graph, and that should automatically make it move in the same way the other objects are moving. Okay, so I've done that, and let's go ahead and turn this into a prefab by selecting our prefabs folder and dragging this guy down in there. And so now I've got this health pickup. Health is the tag, and so now what I can do is I can hide this and select this copy and just go ahead and turn it off. But I'm just going to drop this into my obstacle generator, right? And these are not necessary. I keep them in there just so I have some, right, when there's no clones, I have some idea of what I've put in this group. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to go back to my obstacle generator. I'm going to go to my flow graph, and I'm going to come down here and say, okay, this is the one that I want to change, and I want this to be my health. So I'm just going to type in, what is it, health pickup, capital H. And there it is. And so I'm going to adjust that. So now, the other thing is, let's go ahead and check the capsule boost. I may have already fixed it in mine, but yours may just be named boost. But if I select that and open up my capsule collider, I have it set as a trigger. You should make sure that you have it set as a trigger. And then also something I noticed while I was messing around was that cracks were forming in the road, which we'll talk about in a bit. And some of the capsules were falling through because I forgot to uncheck use gravity on the rigid body. And I don't know if I did that in that previous little bit of the tutorial. Okay, so I've got everything set here. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Okay, and I'm going to select the obstacle generator. Okay, so I've got health units here. And right, so those are coming up sometimes, but I've got a lot more obstacles, and it is random, right? So sometimes more health shows up than others. And something, I may want to make this so that, it's really rare that a health unit comes up, right? And it really just depends on what we're doing. And so something else I want you to note is do you see how there are cracks? I'm going to pause this. There we go. Do you see how there's gaps forming between the tiles? This is something with the way that we programmed the motion of the tiles that's causing all sorts of problems. And so this is something that we're going to fix because in the previous tutorials, I didn't have you implement adjusting the speed of the road because when you do so, the tiles get out of sync. And so I wanted to have a full tutorial to be able to show you how to do that. So now that we've got these three objects in here, now, right, the health pickup isn't doing anything right now, right? And so what we would need to do is we'd need to figure out where we have those, where we're going to be calculating hit points and where we're going to be calculating a couple of other things. And then we can make that actually useful. But at this point, we're going to hold off on having it useful. We've already seen how you can slow things down and speed things up using other obstacles.